Today, we are diving into one of the most important legal documents in all of history, the 12 Tables. Now, this isn't just some dusty old text. This is the moment Roman law stepped out of the shadows and into the public square, and it changed the very foundation of Western justice. But to really get why this was such a big deal, you gotta understand what life was like before the law was written down. Seriously, just think about that for a second. What if the rules that governed your life, your property, your freedom, were known only to a powerful few? What if you could be punished for breaking a law you didn't even know existed? Well, that was the reality in early Rome. You see, Roman society was split right down the middle. You had the patricians, the ruling class, the elites, and they basically held all the cards. They knew the laws because, well, they were the ones making the judgments. Then you had everyone else, the plebeians. For them, life was a constant guessing game, totally at the mercy of decisions that must have felt completely random. This imbalance of knowledge was a huge imbalance of power, and, that kind of thing can only last for so long. So yeah, the plebeians got fed up, they demanded change, and the result was this incredible document, the 12 Tables. A special commission sat down and wrote out the laws of Rome for the very first time. They carved them onto bronze tablets and put them up in the public forum for absolutely everyone to see. This was a revolution. Seriously, it meant the law was no longer a secret weapon of the elite, it was a public standard for all. So what did these new public laws actually say? Let's start with the basics, the real nitty-gritty. What happened if you had a legal problem? How did you even get somebody to show up to court in the first place? The very first table gets straight to the point. No messing around. It says, if you are called to court, then you are to go. If you do not, you will be captured and brought before the court with force. I mean, how clear is that? A court summons wasn't some polite invitation you could just ignore. Nope, it was an order. And if you blew it off, there were immediate physical consequences. This set the tone for the state's authority right from the start. Just let that sink in. The law didn't just say, hey, you should probably go. It gave the other person the actual legal right to physically grab you and drag you there if you refused. It established a clear, non-negotiable process right out of the gate. And get this, how did they handle witnesses who were maybe a little reluctant to testify? Forget a subtle subpoena. The official, legally sanctioned method was basically public shaming. You were legally allowed to stand outside a witness's house and just shout at them for 3 days straight. It sounds completely bizarre to us, but hey, it was a pretty direct way to make sure people did their civic duty. Okay, moving from the public square and into the Roman home, and whoa boy, the 12 Tables give us a really stark and, frankly, often shocking look into the Roman family. And at the absolute center of that whole structure, with almost unbelievable power, was the father. This is probably one of the most brutal laws in the entire code. It legally required what we would consider just unthinkable. If you have a child that is seriously deformed, he or she must be put to death. This shows you that a father's authority wasn't just about discipline, it was absolute. It was the power of life and death right from the moment of birth. It really reveals the unsentimental nature of Roman society. And that paternal power didn't end in infancy. A father could legally sell his own son into slavery. He could do it once, and the son would eventually return to his control. He could do it a second time, same deal. It was only after the third time, this number right here, was the son finally, legally, free from his father's control. The law treated children like property that could be sold, returned, and sold again. And what about women? Well, the laws also pretty clearly spelled out their role in society. A woman, no matter her age, was required to have a male guardian at all times, and her control over her own property was shaky at best. If she were declared mentally unfit, control didn't pass to her kids or a chosen heir. Nope, it automatically went to the nearest male relative. And hey, remember that original conflict between the classes we talked about? While writing down the laws created transparency, it definitely didn't create equality. In fact, the law was now used to make that social divide official. Table 11 explicitly said you could not marry outside your class. It cemented that class structure in the most personal way you can imagine. All right, the final theme we're going to look at is how the 12 Tables dealt with property, crime, and the punishments that followed. And let me tell you, these laws paint a picture of a society that valued property and order above pretty much everything else. The process for dealing with debt was, well, it was ruthlessly efficient. Okay, so you get a 30-day grace period to pay up. After that, the person you owe money to has the legal right to physically capture you. From there, you could be forced into servitude or even sold into slavery to satisfy the debt. There was no concept of bankruptcy. Your very body was the final collateral. The laws around property really show you some fascinating Roman priorities. Just look at this contrast. On the one hand, if a thief broke into your home at night, you could legally kill them, not a crime. But on the other hand, if you intentionally burned down your own property, that was a capital offense. Punishment? Death. Protecting your property was a right, but destroying it was seen as a threat to public order. As this table shows, crimes against the state were treated with just as much severity. Taking a bribe as a judge or committing treason were both met with the death penalty. But notice that last entry. If a slave committed a crime, only the slave was punished. The owner bore no responsibility. It just reinforces that legal status of a slave as property, not as a person. The tables also covered a whole range of other civil rules for daily life. They established that property contracts were legally binding, which is a cornerstone of commerce, right? They made citizens responsible for fixing public roads, and they even regulated sacred matters, like banning burials inside the city for health reasons, and, kind of oddly, forbidding women from wailing and crying at funerals, most likely to keep things orderly. So, after looking at all these specific and, let's be honest, often harsh laws, what is the ultimate legacy of the 12 Tables? What should we really take away from this foundational code? So what's the bottom line? The 12 Tables were a monumental step toward transparency, creating a system where the rules were known to everyone. But, and this is a huge but, this transparency didn't equal justice. The rules themselves were often brutal, reinforcing a rigid social hierarchy where fathers had absolute power, women were subordinates, and class divisions were literally written into the law. Although the original bronze tablets were eventually destroyed, their impact was just immeasurable. For centuries, Roman schoolboys had to memorize all 12 tables. This code became the bedrock of the Roman Republic's legal system, and its principles, like having a written public law, would echo through the ages, influencing legal systems across the entire Western world. Which leaves us with a final question to think about. The 12 Tables made the law known to all, which was a huge step toward fairness. But as we've seen, many of those laws were profoundly unjust by our standards today. So it forces us to ask, is transparency the same thing as justice? Does simply writing a law down make it right?